The festival lights strung between the oak trees cast everything in amber, making the evening feel suspended between day and night. Linda had come reluctantly, pulled from her summer grading by colleagues who insisted she needed air, needed people, needed something beyond the quiet corners of her office, where she'd spent most of June marking papers and avoiding the social obligations that felt heavier each year. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment. Thanks so much for watching. She stood near the poetry booth, a paper cup of wine warming in her hands, watching the crowd drift between booths selling handmade jewelry and local honey. The air smelled of funnel cake and cut grass, sounds of laughter and distant music weaving through the humid evening. She was calculating how long she needed to stay before politeness allowed her to slip away when she heard her name. Professor Hartwell? The voice carried something familiar, a cadence that made her turn before her mind caught up. The woman standing 3 feet away was striking, tall, confident, wearing a simple sundress that suggested success without trying too hard. Her dark hair was shorter than Linda remembered, sophisticated now, framing a face that had lost its youthful softness, but gained something more compelling. Emma! The name came out before Linda could stop it, before she could pretend not to recognize the woman who had once sat in the 3rd row of her Victorian literature course, who had written papers that made Linda look forward to grading, who had lingered after class with questions that had nothing to do with Dickens or Bronte, and everything to do with understanding the world. You remember. Emma's smile was different now, less eager, more knowing, but it carried traces of the 19-year-old who had quoted Yeats during office hours and blushed when Linda praised her insights. Of course I remember. Linda felt something shift in her chest, a recognition that went deeper than memory. You were one of my best students. I was completely intimidated by you. Emma stepped closer, and Linda caught the scent of something clean and expensive, perfume that spoke of boardrooms and success. You made Victorian literature feel dangerous. I'd never had a professor who talked about books like they could change your life. Linda felt heat rise in her cheeks. She had forgotten how direct Emma could be, how she had a way of cutting through politeness to say exactly what she meant. What brings you back to town? Work, initially. I'm consulting for the university on their new digital humanities program. But... Emma paused, her gaze holding Linda's with an intensity that made the festival noise fade into background. I wanted to see if it felt the same. The town, the campus, you. The last word hung between them, and Linda felt her breath catch. There was something in Emma's voice, in the way she said, you, that carried weight Linda wasn't sure she was ready to bear. And does it? Feel the same? Emma's smile was slow, considering. No, it feels bigger somehow. Less intimidating. Her eyes moved over Linda's face with a directness that made Linda's pulse quicken. You look exactly the same. Linda knew it wasn't true. She was 45 now, silver threading through her brown hair, lines at the corners of her eyes that spoke of too many late nights grading and not enough sleep. But something in Emma's gaze made her feel seen in a way she hadn't in years. You look... Linda started, then stopped, aware that any compliment would sound inadequate. Emma had become the kind of woman who commanded attention, poised, successful, beautiful in a way that seemed effortless. You look like you found your place in the world. Have I? Emma tilted her head, and Linda saw a flash of the uncertainty that had always lived beneath her student confidence. Sometimes I think I've just gotten better at pretending. They stood in the space between booths, the crowd flowing around them like water around stones. Linda was acutely aware of how close Emma stood, close enough that she could see the faint freckles across her nose that makeup hadn't quite covered. close enough to notice that her breathing was slightly shallow. "Are you staying long?" Linda asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. "2 months, maybe longer if the project expands." Emma paused. "I rented a place on Maple Street, the blue house with the wraparound porch." Linda knew the house. She walked past it every morning on her way to campus. The thought of Emma there, just 6 blocks from her own small cottage, made something flutter in her stomach. "I should let you get back to your evening," Emma said. But she didn't move away. If anything, she seemed to lean slightly closer. "But maybe, would you like to have coffee sometime? I'd love to hear about your work. Catch up properly." The invitation was casual, the kind extended between former colleagues, but something in Emma's eyes suggested it carried more weight than the words implied. Linda found herself nodding before she'd fully considered what she was agreeing to. "I'd like that." Emma smiled, and Linda remembered suddenly how that smile had once made her lose her train of thought mid-lecture. "Saturday! There's that cafe on Elm Street that used to serve those enormous blueberry scones. Rosemary's, it's still there. Perfect. 10 o'clock? Linda nodded again, not trusting her voice. Emma reached out, her fingers brushing against Linda's arm just below her elbow. The touch was brief, friendly, nothing that anyone watching would think twice about, but Linda felt it like electricity, a current that seemed to travel directly to her chest. "I'm really glad to see you, Professor." "Linda," she said quietly. "You can call me Linda now." Emma's eyes softened. Linda. The name sounded different in her voice, intimate somehow, like she was tasting it. "I'll see you Saturday." Linda watched her walk away, noting the confidence in her stride. The way other people's eyes followed her movement through the crowd, she stood frozen by the poetry booth, her mind replaying the conversation, the way Emma had said her name, the brief pressure of fingers against her arm. The drive home was a blur of streetlights and stop signs. Linda parked in her driveway and sat in the darkness for several minutes, trying to understand what had just happened. Emma was no longer her student, hadn't been for over a decade. She was a successful woman, accomplished, clearly capable of making her own decisions. And yet Linda felt the familiar weight of boundaries, of propriety, of all the reasons she had trained herself not to notice when intelligent young women looked at her with something that went beyond academic admiration. But Emma wasn't young anymore. She was 31, Linda calculated, a woman who had built a career, who had presumably had relationships, who had chosen to seek Linda out at a festival where she could have easily avoided her entirely. Linda unlocked her front door and stepped into the familiar quiet of her cottage. The living room felt smaller than usual, cluttered with the detritus of summer solitude. Books stacked on every surface, papers scattered across the coffee table, a coffee mug with a ring stain that had been there so long it seemed permanent. She moved through her evening routine mechanically, changing clothes, washing her face, checking the locks. But her mind remained focused on amber light and dark hair and the way Emma had said her name. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the window open to let in the night air that still carried the faint scent of festival smoke. Sleep came fitfully, filled with dreams that felt more like memories, a classroom where sunlight slanted across empty desks, a voice asking questions that had nothing to do with literature, brown eyes that held attention just a moment too long. Saturday arrived with the kind of heat that made the air shimmer above the pavement. Linda changed clothes 3 times before settling on a simple dress that she told herself was chosen for comfort, not because it brought out the green in her eyes, or because she remembered Emma once mentioning that green was her favorite color. Rosemary's was exactly as it had been 15 years ago. Mismatched chairs, local art on the walls, the scent of cinnamon and coffee beans that seemed baked into the wooden floors. Linda arrived 5 minutes early and chose a table near the window, her hands fidgeting with the menu she knew by heart. Emma appeared in the doorway at exactly 10 o'clock, and Linda felt her breath catch. She wore jeans and a white blouse that was somehow both casual and elegant, her hair pulled back in a way that revealed the graceful line of her neck. She spotted Linda immediately, and her face lit up with a smile that seemed genuinely pleased. "You look lovely," Emma said as she sat down, and Linda felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Thank you. You look—" Linda paused, aware that she was staring. "You look wonderful." The waitress appeared, and they ordered coffee for Linda, tea for Emma, a blueberry scone to share that neither of them would finish. When they were alone again, Emma leaned forward slightly, resting her chin on her hand. "So tell me everything. Are you still terrifying undergraduates with your passion for the Brontes?" Linda laughed, surprised by how easily the conversation flowed. "I've been told I've mellowed with age." "I doubt that." Emma's eyes sparkled with something that might have been mischief. "You were never terrifying in a bad way. You were terrifying because you made us think. You made us question everything we thought we knew about literature, about ourselves." "Did I?" Linda found herself leaning forward too, drawn into the intensity of Emma's gaze. "You changed how I read, how I write, how I think about language and power and—" Emma paused, seeming to consider her words carefully. "How I think about desire." The word hung between them, heavier than the summer air. Linda felt something flutter in her chest, a recognition of territory they were approaching that felt both familiar and dangerous. "You're writing," Linda said, redirecting to safer ground. "Are you still writing?" "Poetry, mostly. Some essays." Emma's smile turned self-deprecating. "Nothing like what I thought I'd write when I was 20, but maybe more honest. I'd love to read something sometime." "Would you?" Emma's voice was soft, and there was something vulnerable in her expression that reminded Linda of office hours, of a young woman seeking approval from someone she admired. "Of course." They talked for 2 hours, the conversation moving from literature to travel to the changes in the town. Linda found herself laughing more than she had in months, drawn into Emma's stories of corporate consulting and poetry readings in coffee shops across the country. But beneath the surface conversation, she was aware of other things: the way Emma's fingers played with the handle of her teacup, the way her eyes seemed to find Linda's mouth when she spoke, the way their knees bumped under the small table and neither of them moved away. "I should let you go," Emma said finally, though she made no move to leave. "You probably have papers to grade, academic summer things to do." "Not really." Linda realized it was true. For the first time in years, she had nowhere urgent to be, nothing pressing demanding her attention. "What about you? Consulting empire to build?" Emma laughed. "I'm actually between projects for a few weeks, which is why I thought—" She paused, seeming to gather courage. "Would you like to see the house? I'm quite proud of how it's shaping up, and I could use a second opinion on the garden. The previous tenants clearly had no idea what they were doing with the landscaping." Linda knew she should say no, should make polite excuses about weekend obligations, and retreat to the safety of her cottage, where she could analyze this interaction from a safe distance. Instead, she heard herself saying, "I'd love to see it." The walk to Maple Street took 10 minutes, but it felt both longer and shorter. Longer because Linda was acutely aware of Emma walking beside her, the swing of her arms, the sound of her sandals on the sidewalk. Shorter because she found herself wishing they could keep walking, keep talking, avoid whatever was waiting at the blue house with the wraparound porch. The house was beautiful, Linda had to admit. Emma had clearly spent time and money making it feel like home: flowers and window boxes, comfortable furniture on the porch, curtains that filtered the harsh afternoon light into something golden and welcoming. "It's lovely." Linda said as they climbed the porch steps. You always did have good taste. Did I? Emma unlocked the front door and held it open. I remember being hopelessly uncool. All my professors and poetry, and absolutely no idea how to dress or do my hair or talk to other students. Linda stepped into the cool interior, noting the careful arrangement of furniture, the books already filling built-in shelves, the way Emma had made a temporary space feel permanent. You were never uncool, you were serious. There's a difference. Is there? Emma closed the door behind them, and suddenly the space felt smaller, more intimate. I always felt like I was playing catch-up, trying to seem sophisticated enough to deserve your attention. Linda turned to face her, surprised by the admission. You always had my attention. The words came out more honest than she'd intended, carrying weight she hadn't meant to give them. Emma went still, her hand still on the doorknob, her eyes searching Linda's face. Did I? Linda felt the moment crystallize around them, felt the careful distance she'd been maintaining begin to collapse. Emma was no longer the uncertain 19-year-old seeking approval. She was a woman who knew exactly what she was asking, who had invited Linda here with intention, who was looking at her now with something that went far beyond nostalgia or academic admiration. Yes, Linda said quietly. You did. Emma stepped closer, close enough that Linda could see the flecks of gold in her brown eyes, could count the freckles across the bridge of her nose. And now? Linda's heart was beating so hard she was certain Emma could hear it. She thought about boundaries, about propriety, about all the reasons this was complicated. Then she thought about amber light and a voice saying her name like a prayer, and the way Emma had looked at her across a coffee table like she was worth looking at. Now, Linda said, her voice barely above a whisper, I think we're both old enough to know what we want. Emma's smile was soft, relieved, tinged with something that might have been wonder. I was hoping you'd say that. The kiss, when it came, was nothing like Linda had imagined during those restless nights when her mind wandered into territory she'd forbidden herself to explore. It was gentle, questioning, Emma's lips soft against hers with a reverence that made Linda's chest ache. It lasted only a moment before Emma pulled back, searching Linda's face for signs of regret or retreat. Is this okay? Emma asked, her voice slightly breathless. Linda answered by reaching up to cup Emma's face in her hands, by letting herself finally acknowledge what had been building between them since the moment their eyes met across the festival crowd. The second kiss was deeper, more certain, and Linda felt something she'd buried years ago unfurl in her chest like a flower opening to sunlight. They stood in the entryway for a long time, holding each other with the careful intensity of people who had waited too long for permission to want what they wanted. Emma's hands found the small of Linda's back, Linda's fingers tangled in Emma's hair, and between them grew a heat that had nothing to do with the summer afternoon. I've thought about this, Emma whispered against Linda's ear, her breath warm and slightly unsteady. For years. I know I shouldn't have. I know it was inappropriate, but I couldn't stop. Linda felt a shiver run through her that had nothing to do with temperature. I used to sit in your office and watch your hands when you talked about books. I used to imagine what it would feel like if you touched me the way you touched the pages when you read passages aloud. Emma pulled back to meet Linda's eyes. Tell me I wasn't alone in that. Linda felt something break open inside her, some carefully maintained wall crumbling under the weight of honesty. You weren't alone. The admission hung between them, transforming the air, making everything that followed feel inevitable. Emma led her through the house, past the carefully arranged living room, past the kitchen with its windows overlooking the garden that needed work. They moved slowly, stopping to kiss against door frames, to press close in hallways, to learn the geography of each other's bodies through summer clothes that seemed suddenly like barriers. Emma's bedroom was at the back of the house, filled with afternoon light filtered through sheer curtains. The bed was unmade, Linda noticed with a strange tenderness. White sheets tangled from sleep, a book spine up on the nightstand, clothes draped over a chair in a way that spoke of a life lived without constant self-consciousness. "Are you sure?" Emma asked, though her hands were already finding the buttons of Linda's dress, her fingers working with the careful precision of someone who had imagined this moment many times. Linda answered by pulling Emma closer, by letting her hands explore the curve of Emma's waist, the warm skin just beneath the hem of her blouse. They undressed each other slowly, with the reverence of people unwrapping something precious, something they'd waited too long to touch. Emma's body was different than Linda had imagined, stronger, more confident, marked with the small scars and imperfections that spoke of a life fully lived. But her eyes were the same, wide and dark, and fixed on Linda's face with an intensity that made breathing difficult. "You're beautiful," Emma whispered, her hands tracing the line of Linda's shoulder, the curve of her breast. "You're so beautiful." Linda had forgotten what it felt like to be looked at like this, to be wanted with such obvious desire, such careful attention. Emma's touch was reverent but certain, her mouth finding places that made Linda gasp and arch, and forget every reason this might be complicated. They moved together with the slow urgency of people making up for lost time. Every touch weighted with years of imagining, every kiss deeper than the last. Linda felt herself dissolving, felt the careful control she'd maintained for so long slip away under Emma's hands, under the whispered words that sounded like poetry against her skin. "I dreamed about this," Emma said, her voice rough with desire. "In your class, in my apartment after graduation, in conference rooms when I should have been thinking about spreadsheets and profit margins. I dreamed about touching you like this." Linda's response was lost in sensation, in the overwhelming reality of Emma's body against hers, in the discovery that desire didn't diminish with age. It deepened, became richer, more complicated, more necessary. She felt herself come apart under Emma's attention, felt the boundaries between past and present dissolve until there was only this moment, this bed, this woman who had somehow found her way back into Linda's carefully ordered life and turned it completely upside down. Afterward, they lay tangled in the white sheets, the afternoon light gradually fading toward evening. Linda's head rested on Emma's shoulder, her hand tracing lazy patterns on Emma's stomach, both of them quiet in the way that follows profound revelation. "What happens now?" Emma asked finally, her voice soft against Linda's hair. Linda didn't have an answer. She knew there would be complications. The university, though Emma was no longer her student, might still raise eyebrows. Their ages, though Emma was clearly an adult, would invite judgment. The fact that Emma's time in town was temporary added another layer of uncertainty. But lying there in the golden light, feeling Emma's heartbeat steady beneath her ear, Linda found she didn't care about any of that. For the first time in years, she felt fully alive, fully present, fully herself. "I don't know," she said honestly. "But I know I don't want to pretend this didn't happen. I don't want to go back to polite distance and professional boundaries." Emma's arms tightened around her. "Good," she whispered, "because I don't think I could bear that." They stayed in bed until the sun set, talking in whispers about books and dreams and the strange circular nature of time that had brought them back to each other when they were finally ready to receive what had always been waiting between them. And when Linda finally drove home through the quiet streets, she carried with her the scent of Emma's skin, the memory of brown eyes wide with desire, and the certain knowledge that summer had only just begun.